Hi, everyone. In this episode, we delve into chilling accounts of creatures so bizarre and elusive that they will challenge your understanding of the natural world. Bundle up as we hear the chilling details, examine the evidence, and attempt to unravel the truth behind these enigmatic creatures. So, if you're in it to win it, please squash that subscribe button and let's get into the stories. North Carolina, 2018. I was dog sitting for my mother's dog named Jack, and he wasn't an ideal dog to take care of. He was a mutt, and his pit bull blood could make him aggressive, especially with other dogs. My mother lives out in the country, and she has 2 acres for him to run around. This is great because it helps him get out some of his energy. And out there, he doesn't bother anyone because beyond her property is just woods. I let him outside around 10 o'clock at night one night, and right off the bat, he ran into the woods behind the house. Didn't even pause a second. I figured that would be the last time I saw him that night because it's not unusual for him to take off like that and stay away for a while. He pretty much always comes back on his own after roaming in the woods for a bit. Anyway, it was about an hour later and I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard dog noises and what sounded like claws scrabbling against the bedroom window. Jack had apparently made his way back home for the night. But obviously dogs and certainly Jack don't normally scratch at the window to come in, so that was my first indication that something was off. I got up and looked out the window, but all I saw was Jack standing by a tree about 30 feet from the bedroom window. How did he scratch the window and then get over by the tree so fast? Certainly that's not normal dog behavior at all. And he was just standing there looking straight at the back door of the house, not barking or moving at all. He was stiff like a statue. I opened the window and called out his name, and he turned his head towards me a bit, but didn't move any closer or bark at all. It was almost like he was in a trance or something. So anyway, I knew there was no way I could fall asleep with him being home, but not inside. Not to mention that he was acting so skittish and weird. So I put on my shoes and walked outside. As soon as he heard me open the door, his fur stood up straight. He didn't bark at me or move an inch, just continued to stand by that tree in that weird, trance-like state. I began to walk toward him, and as soon as he saw me do that, his fur stood up even higher. Normally, Jack would run over to me with his tail wagging like crazy, but not this time. He just stood there like a dog who was possessed until I got to within about 10 feet of him. Then I heard it. The noise was somewhere between a dog barking and a person screaming, but it was perfectly clear that it wasn't coming from Jack. I turned around slowly and looked back towards my mother's bedroom window that I had just looked out earlier. The window was in the opposite corner of her house from where I was now standing. And there, standing right at the window, but just out of eyesight, if you were inside, was a huge dog-like creature that had its back to my mom's bedroom. It had fur all over its body and had dog features like a snout and pointy ears, but it stood on 2 legs like a man. I could see large, muscular arms, and at the end of them I could see what looked like paws. And at the end of the paws were long claws that looked like they could rip anything apart in seconds. It was looking at me with these hyper-aware, amber-colored eyes that were shining in the moonlight, and I could see its mouth perfectly. It had lips that were pulled back in a snarl which showed off 2 rows of teeth that looked like they could also tear up anything they wanted. I swear I could even feel its breath blast right through my body as it continued to stare at and snarl at me. However, at the same time I noticed that it was breathing extremely fast, like how a dog would pant if they were afraid or stressed or maybe hurt. I could see its fur was standing straight up and the smell of fear was almost palpable. I don't know if it was my fear or Jack's fear or even the creature's fear, but I do know that the feeling of panic filled the air around us. I was feeling pretty sure that the creature was going to attack me or Jack and maybe even devour us right on the spot. But before it could do anything, Jack turned and ran over to it with his mouth snarling and tail straight as can be. Jack had obviously snapped out of it and was now not scared of the creature at all. I'm sure that thing must have been really confused because he probably had never met a dog like Jack before. He probably thought that Jack would be scared of him, but Jack ran right up to it now and began snarling back at him from about 2 feet away. The creature just stood there for a minute, with its mouth open in what I honestly thought looked like amazement. As they stood there in their standoff, Jack began to circle around it, and they ended up with the creature cornered near my mom's bedroom window. And then, before anything else could happen, it turned and ran off into the woods with Jack close behind. I couldn't see them once they were in the woods, but I could hear noises like a dog that was being hurt. I now started to really think that the thing might have been hurt, because why else would it be seemingly afraid of us and run away? Then again, I've also been reading up on them, and I'm learning that they don't really want to hurt us. They just want to assert their dominance and let us know that they are there and that we need to be careful not to encroach on their space. Anyway, it's now been a few days since Jack took on the creature, and he's been home and not going outside much. He is acting strange, though. Like I hear him whimpering in a way I've never heard before, and sometimes he's even been getting on his hind legs to look out the window and howling. Normally, he would attack anything and have no problems doing it. I mean, he always patrols the yard when people are outside, and he has never been afraid of anything. I think that the creature really did something to Jack, or did something to his brain to mess him up in some way. He's never acted like this before, and I think we will be keeping a close eye on him and my mom's yard. She's expected to get back home from her business trip today, and I'm sure she'll be relieved to see Jack is okay. I did tell her all about it, and I'm not sure what she thinks. It was hard to tell over the phone, but I'll know better when I see her face to face. I don't know if that thing will ever come back. I hope not, because it really scared me and has me on edge too. But at the same time, now that I've had some time to think about it all, I'm kind of curious what that thing is all about. I mean, I'd like to learn more about what it could be. I think it was a half man, half dog person, like a mutation. But I don't know. What do you think? Hello, Lilith. Before I begin this narrative, I would like to express that I'm a huge fan of your channel, which has proven to be an invaluable source of comfort based on what happened to me. Today, I'd like to share a rather extraordinary encounter I had during a hiking expedition with a creature that I think was a rake. Just about a month ago now, my friends and I planned a hiking trip. As someone who's often the more cautious and less adventurous one, I initially tried to discourage them. Despite my reservations, their enthusiasm was unwavering, and I eventually decided to join them. After all, I thought it might be a refreshing change to step out of my routine and immerse myself in the great outdoors, a practice that doesn't come naturally to me. To help you follow the story, I'll tell you about my friends and give you a brief description of each. Firstly, there's Frank, a regular guy with brown hair, decently tall, a bit on the pale side, but definitely the life of the party. Then there's Bob, who's taller, sports a full beard, and naturally assumes the role of our group's leader. Finally, there's Laura, who is perhaps the most grounded and practical among us. Prior to this, my experiences with hiking were few and far between. I recall going on a couple of such outings in my younger years, both of which ended in accidents, including a near arm break and a close call with a concussion. That's why this hike was almost like starting from scratch for me. I made sure to get myself sturdy boots and plenty of trail mix and coffee. Bob drove us to our destination, a park located in Louisiana that had been discovered online by Laura. She was the one who planned the whole trip after Bob initiated the idea. On the journey, Frank entertained us. He entertained us in the car with his eccentric singing and an unusual smell that was oddly reminiscent of rubber. We were all in agreement on that. Despite the oddities, we were also grateful for his role as the snack provider, as he'd brought large bags of chips and an assortment of drinks. Upon arrival to the park, we settled into a small, rented cabin that was basic but clean and tidy. Before starting our evening hike, which they all insisted we do first, we had a brief break and just relaxed a bit. Bob and Frank were engrossed in a passionate discussion about football, while I tuned into something on the TV, and Laura lost herself in a book. When it was time to start, I was nudged awake from having fallen asleep on the couch, and we headed out. I won't lie in saying I grumbled a bit at having to do a night hike first. Frank was guiding us and identified a promising path that he thought would be easy in the darkness. so we started out by following him. Meanwhile, Bob was interjecting random witticisms and even breaking into sporadic, stupid dances. I'm sure we looked like a bunch of idiots trying to look cool in the forest. But for the most part, it was a fairly normal hike until just about an hour into it. That's when we began our return journey. That's when our normality was somewhat shattered. While making our way downhill, Laura mentioned she had caught a glimpse of something unusual. I assumed it was perhaps a deer or some other common woodland creature, but after we all looked around and found nothing, I reassured her it was probably just a deer or perhaps even a squirrel. She seemed convinced it wasn't a squirrel, but accepted that it could have been a deer darting around behind the trees of the forest. As we continued, she again claimed to see something. This time I made some stupid comment like, yes, we are in the wild. It's natural to encounter wildlife. Despite her persistence in saying that what she spotted was not just a regular animal, I felt she was probably overreacting. However, she then approached Bob about it, who assured her he'd keep an eye out for any strange creatures, although his primary concern was getting back to our cabin. Frank, in his typical laid-back fashion, remained uninvolved, happily crunching on his snacks. Unbelievably, he had his earphones on and was therefore oblivious to Laura's claims. In an unexpected twist, Laura's insistence on spotting something strange was vindicated when Bob, in a very whispered exclamation, drew our attention to a truly horrific sight. We all stopped and looked at something that shook each one of us to our core. There, at the edge of the light from our headlamps, was a grotesque and hideous creature resembling a pallid human or a hairless wolf or hyena. It was intently crouched low to the ground and feasting raw on what appeared to be a deer. The sight was so ghastly I had to look away immediately. Bob hushed us all with a frantic wave of his hands and told us to maintain silence and quicken our pace without running. That was a given, as we were naturally inclined to want to get out of there. Frank turned off his music when he saw Bob waving his hands, and Laura managed to mouth a smug "I told you so." But all we wanted was to reach the safety of our cabin. Fortunately, the creature was at a safe distance, and we don't think it even noticed us. I realize that seems amazing, but it was really intent on its kill. Luckily, our cabin was not far at this point. Though we were not in immediate danger, the encounter was undoubtedly terrifying. Back at the cabin, speculation ran wild amongst us about the creature's identity, but we were unanimous in our decision to cut our trip short and return home. None of us were against that decision, and as soon as day broke, we were out of there. On our way home, I began researching potential explanations for the creature and concluded that it could have been the rake, a cryptid I hadn't heard of before. All I had ever heard of were the more mainstream mythical creatures such as Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or the Kraken. Once home, I spoke to my father about our experience. Based on my description, he suggested it might have been the rake or possibly a rabid animal that had lost its fur. He was leaning towards the latter, and I think just humoring me by agreeing with my assessment of it being a rake. In a later group call, we all rehashed the day's unforgettable events. I shared my unsurprising resolution to take a permanent hiatus from hiking, as this was my third awful experience in the outdoors, and for me, this was 3 strikes and you're out. Everyone understood my stance. And with that, Lilith, that is my terrifying encounter with the cryptid that I believe was the rake. I hope my tale adds some interest to your channel, and I look forward to hearing other people's experiences with these cryptids. Thank you for your time. I had just bought a nice chunk of land out in North Dakota for deer hunting. There was a little off-grid cabin on one corner of the property, but that was all there was in terms of modern amenities. Most of the land was open prairies, but there was a pond and a couple of sparse forested areas near the back. It was my first year hunting in this exact area, so I didn't know it very well. But I could see that the pond was a highly trafficked water source, and so I started setting up stands near the trails that were going in and out. The price of land out here was already typically lower than average, but I had gotten this place exceptionally cheap. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but after what happened, I certainly know why now. It was opening weekend and I had everything ready to go. The land was around a 5-hour drive from my house, and I had spent the last 3 weekends out there, setting up stands and fixing things around the house. It felt isolated up there, but I guess that's because it is. Rolling hills disappeared into the horizon. No forests, no mountains, no civilization. Just the prairie. My brother met me at the cabin for opening weekend, and our luck started out great. I got a deer Saturday morning in the stand above the pond, and he got one Sunday just before dawn as we were walking out to our spots. Everything was as it should be. On the second night, my brother had to go out to his car for something. I can't remember what it was, but when he came back in, he mentioned that it was kind of creepy outside. Different than before. Like the whole atmosphere changed. It was just something he said in passing and didn't discuss it any further. But he was right. Something about the land changed when the sun went down. I didn't know what exactly was going on, but it felt foreboding in a way that I couldn't explain. I didn't want to sound like a wimp, but I didn't like going outside at night there either. I never had a problem with the dark before, but this was somehow different. My brother had to leave on Sunday evening and head back home for work on Monday. I had taken the entire week off to stay at the cabin. I had another deer tag, and I figured I would try to use it. Watching my brother's truck disappear down the road made me realize just how uncomfortable I was with the isolation in this place. It was getting dark, so I went back inside the cabin and locked the door. I got a phone call from my brother about 20 minutes after he left. Cell service wasn't the greatest in the area, so I could only make out about every second word he said. He said he saw something on the road and that he couldn't turn around. I think he was trying to get back to the cabin but said he couldn't. He said something about eyes, but I couldn't make it out, but I did hear the last part. He told me to lock the door and stay inside until morning. I tried to call him back about a dozen times, but I couldn't get through. I was panicking, thinking something happened to him on the road. I started packing up my things and loading them into the car. I would be able to get decent cell service in the next town, or at the very least, find him along the road. My brother's warning made me pretty worried, but I had to get a hold of him and find out what happened. I locked up the cabin and headed towards my car. But just as I opened the door, I heard my brother calling my name. I looked in every direction, but I couldn't see him anywhere. The driveway was empty. I told him I couldn't see him and to flash his headlights, but I received no answer. A moment passed and he called my name again. He asked what I wanted for dinner. And then he said a few other things that I recognized from the last conversation we had out on the prairie. My stomach dropped. It was like someone had recorded us and was playing it back to me. I shined my flashlight around the driveway and the cabin, but I couldn't see anyone. I was now getting frantic. I grabbed my rifle out of my car and loaded it. Not the best state of mind to be carrying a gun, but what else was I going to do? I knew this wasn't just some silly prank. Whatever was harassing me out there was evil. I was sure of it. I heard my name again. It was definitely my brother's voice, but I knew it wasn't him. I thought it was some sort of demon, and I hoped to God that bullets worked on demons, because if I got a sight on it, I was ready to shoot. But the wind was covering up any noises as I tried to look and see the long, rustling grass around the driveway. I slowly spun in a circle, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Eventually, a creature that defied all logic stepped out of the grasses and onto the gravel of the driveway. I turned on my flashlight and pointed the beam of light in the direction of the noise. Immediately, two glowing eyes lit up in the darkness, reflecting the light back at me, just like a cat does when you catch it sneaking around at night. This startled me completely, but I had to keep looking. I couldn't break my stare. This thing had a human-like appearance, but there was something very off about it. Its arms and legs were way too long for its body. They were thin and twig-like, almost as if they were made from stretched-out pieces of taffy. Its skin was a dull gray color, completely devoid of any hair, making it look even stranger. My mind was buzzing, trying to make sense of this bizarre sight. The creature was hunkered down close to the ground, right by the edge of the tall grass that was blowing in the wind. Its body seemed built for standing up straight, like a human or a bear, but for reasons I couldn't understand it chose not to. And there it was, right in front of me. Instead of moving or running away, It just sat there, staring at me from its spot on the ground. I could feel its gaze, intense and unwavering, as it watched me, waiting to see what I would do next. "What the hell are you?" I asked. I didn't expect an answer. I was just talking to myself and thinking out loud. It responded to my voice by turning and looking at me. It then curled its lips and screamed. It sounded inhuman. I don't even know how to describe it. It took a shot at it, but was shaking so badly that I don't know if I even hit it. Whatever happened, though, it was enough to scare the creature away and allow me to get into my car and get the hell out of there. I drove like a bat out of hell towards the next town and found my brother at the gas station. He had also found it as the first place of refuge away from the cabin. He had still been trying desperately to get through to me on the phone from there. I told him what happened after his call. I told him all about how I had tried to leave to help him, and that this insane creature showed up and tried to stop me. He told me all about how he had seen them too, and that's what he was warning me about. He said he had seen dozens of them all over the road as he drove away, and they blocked his path so he couldn't return to me. Needless to say, we only went back to the cabin one more time, and that was to get all of our things in the daylight. I can't tell you how much it helps me that I have him to talk to about this. It seems that no one else wants to believe what they haven't seen themselves. Anyway, I hope our story can help someone else out there who's feeling alone. We're here for anyone who needs us. When I was a very young man, I got a summer job working out in the cornfields. It was very hard work, but honest work pays well, and it was decent enough money to help me save up for a car of my own. I had been bumming rides from my friend and even my parents, offering what money I had for gas, just trying to get around. And I got sick of it. I had been used to helping my dad do mechanic work out in the garage when I was younger, and because I would usually try and devote as much time as I could to help him, he would pay me for it. Extra what I was already making in my allowance, which helped. And that lasted until I was around 14 or 15 when I just kind of lost interest. And at the time being, I was giving as much money as I can in gas. But that's beside the point. As I stared up at the ball of fire in the sky each day, that was my focus. A new car. My own set of wheels. I didn't have to go super expensive, but I wasn't going to do a $600 beater. Unless you grew up in the Midwest like me, you've really got no real idea just how big those cornfields are, and how darn tall some of that stuff can get. When the job had started, there were only a few of us out there each day, and all of the hours were very long. The fields were vast. We'd meet up for lunch breaks just to hear another voice or two. But as the weeks progressed on, the work dwindled, and soon I was the only sucker left out there. I'm telling you, nothing makes you feel more isolated than being in a cornfield. Out there, you can feel very alone. I took to telling myself stories just to get through those long days of total solitude. But what I saw that very last afternoon sure as hell wasn't no fake ghost story, and I swear this on my mama's grave. There were all sorts of critters trying to get to that corn. I'd seen woodchucks, deer, raccoons, but never in my wild dreams had I seen the likes of this thing before. In fact, something like this I thought only existed in the movies. But I guess I was wrong. Maybe these are just wild animals that live in certain regions of the country. I don't know. It was coming up towards the end of the day, and it had been very hot, especially if you know anything about the state of Indiana. The first thing I recall was that it seemed to have gotten really quiet all of a sudden. It's like somebody took the master volume of everything around me, nature included, and pulled it way down to zero. All I could hear was the corn swing in the wind, but barely that. No bugs, no birds, no twittering, nothing. Zip. Zilch. I remember standing there for a moment, wondering what on earth can make everything go quiet. The silence was deafening, so much so that it caught my attention and made me stop. I didn't feel right. Something just felt off. A couple of times I'd seen an eagle fly over, and man, those creatures made a lot of noise trying to scare them off and warn each other. But I ain't ever heard silence before like this. Walking a bit further into the highest corn, I saw why. This thing was standing with its back to me at first. I didn't know what it was, but my mind told me I needed to get out of there, and now. Only my legs wouldn't obey. It's like I was being pulled towards this thing, whatever it was, or whoever it was. Real slowly, it turned around, and I got a very good look at it. Now, here's what happened next. I know you're probably not going to believe me because it probably seems so make-believe, but it's the God-honest truth. What I saw was real tall, like 8 feet or so, covered in dark black hair, matted all over its body. Its legs were like that of a dog, and that's what it resembled. It even had the hocks, but its feet were like massive paws spread out. This thing had really long, stretched, lengthy arms like a human, but more dangly like a chimpanzee, how its arms go far past its waist. But worst of all, the head was like a wolf, a real mean-looking wolf staring down at me like I had just disturbed it, and it wasn't happy to see me. The most intense and fiercest-looking eyes. This thing opened its mouth, and oh God, the teeth! They were more like giant fangs, with sharp little bladed teeth throughout its mouth. I don't know if this is a wolf or what, but as far as I knew, wolves didn't have teeth like this. It was like every tooth was serrated and razor sharp. I didn't hang around any longer. I didn't want to find out what he intended to do with that mouth. I turned and I ran all the way back to my father's truck. And I never stepped foot in those fields ever again after that. Even though it was my last day, I had to tell my boss that I had a medical emergency, and I just never called him back. Yeah, I know no shows are no good, but I can't tell you what that was like. Again, I never stepped foot into those fields ever again. Screw the car and screw the money, it wasn't worth it.